Okay, welcome back. In this segment I want to talk about basically how the whole radon thing got started, because radon as a chemical has not been known to man or to scientists forever. It's a fairly recent, I want to call it an invention. So radon is a decay daughter, and basically what that means is in radiation you start with chemical, we'll call it chemical A. And because it is radioactive, it's going to spit off a couple of protons and a couple of neutrons, and that's basically what radioactive means. And when it does that, now you've got this, and the two protons and neutrons are called an alpha particle. And so those go away, and now you've got a brand new chemical. Maybe it started out as uranium, and then it's going to decay perhaps to radium, and there's this big long chain depending on where we started out in the radioactive tree as to what it's going to be and what it's going to be next. Now the difference between uranium and radium and radon is that the first two are metals, and then radium actually spits off that alpha particle, the two protons and two neutrons, and now this metal becomes a gas. And I don't mean gas like gasoline, I mean gas like oxygen and nitrogen and the kind of stuff that floats through the air. And that's why we have the potential, as reported by EPA, risks as relates to radon. Because now, instead of the radiation that's somewhere in the ground that's outside your house, that's really not affecting the house, now this radon can come into the house, and you're breathing this radioactive air. The next thing that happens is you're breathing this, it's going into your lungs, and let's just say that radon decides to decompose into, go into the next step, and it has a 3-day half-life, which basically means that once it has decomposed from a radium particle into radon, it's got on average 3 days before it decomposes again into whatever's next in the chain. So it's got 3 days to get into your lungs, and if it is in your lungs while it decomposes, now you've got this metal in your lungs that is going to be radioactive, and it's going to be in your lungs for the rest of your life. And of course that can cause cancer. So a couple things I want to make sure you're clear on is that radon is a gas like oxygen and nitrogen, so it's in the air. And there is no place on Earth that you can go that does not have it has oxygen too, that doesn't have some radon. So the background, or normal air, if you want to call it that, is 1 to 2 picocuries per liter. Now radon is colorless and odorless, which means that if you have somebody who believes they have radon because they can smell it, either they're off their rocker or they're smelling something else. So you can't smell radon. Be clear on that. Again, radon is everywhere, and the background is 1 to 2 picocuries per liter. Now, back in the 90s, when I worked as an environmental engineer, we had what we called 3 different levels that EPA recommended for radon. They basically set levels at 4, 10, and 25. And basically what they said is if you've got levels that are 25, you should take action sooner. If you got levels at 10, then you should take action sometime. And if you got levels at 4, then you should consider taking action. And that was a little bit fuzzy and kind of confusing, and we're Americans, we like to have yes or no type answers. So EPA decided to set the action level at 4. So 3.9 now is considered to be safe, and 4.1 is unsafe. This, of course, has some doubts that come with it, and I'm going to talk about one of those stories where I ran into a house that was 4.2. But something you should be aware of is that now that EPA has decided that 4 is the action level. Now the next question is, all right, how dangerous is it to be affected by radon at 4? So of course EPA hired some consultants who had minions like me that did those sorts of studies. And I didn't participate in this particular study. I did very similar ones, and we're going to talk about those too. But basically the assumptions are that maybe you've got a basement, it's at 4, and the assumption, some of those assumptions are that the person was living there for 19 hours per day, and he was living there for 72 years. And basically, I don't know, you can go through your own memory if you have ever lived in any home for 72 years, or if you've ever stayed in any home for 19 hours per day over any period of time, especially if staying in that home means staying in the basement. But these are the EPA assumptions. Based on that, they ran the numbers and whatever other conservative assumptions they might have run, and they determined that under those conditions, a person's risk of dying from radon and lung cancer is about the same as the risk of drowning. Now, this is the point in time where during live presentations, I will ask the realtors in the room to pop their hands in the air if they have a boat. And I will ask them if they are aware that having a boat increases their risk of drowning. Pretty much they all acknowledge that having a boat increases their risk of drowning. And that's the point where I then say, I will go remediate your risk of drowning, and I'll do it for free. You just have to allow me to take your boat. Funny thing is that I have never had one of those offers accepted yet, even though they realize that having a boat increases their risk of drowning. I'm going to state this one more time because I got to be clear. At 4, if you're living in the basement for 19 hours per day for 72 years, then your risk of dying from radon, according to EPA, is about the same as your risk of drowning. Now, a number of years later, they decided, hey, the perceived risk, because generally the consensus among the scientific community is that despite EPA's pronouncements, that it really hasn't drawn enough interest from the American community. They thought that we all were basically ignoring their advice. So they decided to create a new set of assumptions. Now instead of 19 hours per day, they decided that this person was living 24 hours per day in the basement, again for 72 years, and that there's dust in the basement, which the radon was landing on, and that the dust was being continuously circulated to get into the lungs. And so now we've got dusty radon that's getting into the lungs, and 24 hours a day for 72 years. And then they were able to raise the calculated risk of radon cancers away from about the same as your risk of drowning to a number that's a little bit higher. Again, that drew what they considered to be a collective yawn from the American community. Now, you as a realtor might take some disagreement with that, because as home inspectors and as realtors, radon can cause a lot of problems in deals, and we've all dealt with buyers who are very much concerned about radon. But the scientists and the regulators believe that we all generally don't care, for whatever that is worth. So I wanted to just share that sort of information with you so that you understand what EPA's numbers are. Now, I'm going to give you more information like that backs that sort of information up during this hour, and I recognize that I am pretty much the only person who you will ever hear this from. I think part of the reason for that is that I actually used to work for a couple of years in the radiation engineering business, and I'll tell you some more of those stories as we go on. So I kind of understand. The other is that I would prefer to give you the straight scoop rather than just repeat what I'd heard somebody else tell me that they expected me to believe. So I have one of those stories which we will do in the next segment. We'll be right back.